Tyler Reynolds made Ridgewood High his personal kingdom, a bully who did as he pleased. Jaden Carter was one of his favorite targets. Pushed, beaten, mocked, and with a powerful father to protect him, Tyler never faced consequences. Jaden endured it, day after day, year after year. He learned to keep his head down, to take the blows, to pretend it didn't matter, but it did. Then, one day, everything changed. Jaden came home beaten worse than ever, and for the first time, his father, Daniel Carter, a former Delta Force operative, saw the truth, the bruises, the unspoken weight of years of suffering, and he made a decision: no more. His father pushed him beyond his limits, teaching him what it meant to stand his ground, to take control, to strike back with precision and power. And when the moment finally came, Jaden didn't hesitate. Tyler thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe. The morning sun cast a golden glow over Ridgewood High, its red brick exterior standing tall against the crisp autumn air. Students spilling into its halls in clusters, some engaged in carefree laughter, others moving in silent indifference. To most, this was just another day, another cycle of classes and routine. But for Jaden, every step through these corridors carried the weight of an unspoken truth. This school wasn't built for kids like him. He had learned early on that silence was often the safest response, that choosing to look away instead of engaging could mean the difference between making it through the day or being swallowed whole by the ever-present undercurrent of hostility that Ridgewood carried. It wasn't always blatant. Sometimes it was a sharp glance when he raised his hand in class, a smirk when he walked past a table in the cafeteria, a laugh when he brushed shoulders with someone who acted like he didn't belong. Other times, though, it was clearer, sharper, unmistakable in its intent. Like now, Jaden barely had time to register the rough shove against his shoulder before his books hit the ground, his body stumbling forward as the crowded hallway split apart. A familiar voice carrying over the chatter, loud and taunting. "Oops! Didn't see you there, Jaden." Tyler. He stood there, smirking, eyes glinting with something sharp, something cruel. As his friends loomed behind him, entertained, amused, watching Jaden with the expectation that he would do what he always did: pick up his books, ignore the insult, and walk away. Jaden exhaled slowly, steadying himself, forcing his expression to remain blank, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted. "I said," Tyler continued, stepping closer, voice dropping just enough for only Jaden to hear. "Watch where you're walking, boy." A ripple of tension rolled through the surrounding students. Some turned away, pretending not to hear. Others exchanged uneasy glances. But no one spoke. No one ever did. Jaden's jaw tightened. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, the familiar burn of frustration that came with moments like these, the battle between wanting to react and knowing what it would cost him if he did. He had been raised better than this. His father had taught him that some fights weren't worth having, that some battles only fed the enemy. But standing there, staring into Tyler's smirking face, he wondered if that was always true. But before the thought could settle, before he could do anything, Tyler struck again, a hand against his chest, a shove, harder this time, forcing him back a step. "What's wrong?" Tyler grinned, voice dripping with mock innocence. "Aren't you gonna do something? Or are you just gonna stand there like a good little—" The sudden weight of silence swallowed the rest of his words, the hush in the hallway stretching thin as everyone watched. Waiting, breath held in anticipation. Jaden felt his hands clench at his sides. He could hear his father's voice in his head. "Don't react in anger. Control the fight before it begins." But how much longer was he supposed to take this? Seconds stretched, thick with expectation. But in the end, Jaden did what he had always done. He let out a slow breath, forced his hands to relax, then bent down and started gathering his books. Laughter rippled through the crowd as Tyler chuckled, satisfied, nudging one of the books further away with his foot. "Smart choice, Jaden. Stay in your lane." Then he was gone, disappearing down the hall with his entourage, their laughter fading, leaving Jayden on the cold tile floor, staring at the pages of his notebook, the words he had written that morning, the words that suddenly felt so small, so meaningless. He knew what people would say, that he had done the right thing, that walking away was the mature response, that violence wasn't the answer. But deep down, as he pushed himself to his feet and met the cautious eyes of the few students who lingered, he knew the truth. He had lost, again, and he wasn't sure how many more losses he could take. By the time he made it home that evening, the frustration had settled into something deeper, heavier, something that burned under his skin as he stood in the garage, fists slamming against the worn-out punching bag, the dull thud echoing in the quiet. Daniel Carter, standing near the tool bench, watched his son from the corner of his eye. He wasn't the type to pry, never had been. But he wasn't blind either. The way Jayden's movements carried a tension that wasn't there before, the way his shoulders had started holding the weight of something unspoken, the way he never quite met his father's gaze anymore, it told him all he needed to know. Something was wrong, but Jayden wasn't ready to say it. Not yet, so Daniel let it be. For now, you're wasting energy, he said finally. Voice even, measured. Your stance is too stiff. Every punch should be controlled, not thrown just to feel something. Jayden stilled for only a moment before exhaling sharply, stepping back, shaking out his hands. He hesitated, his frustration catching in his throat, before shaking his head. I don't know. It just doesn't feel like enough. Daniel studied him for a long moment before stepping forward, pressing a hand against the bag, stilling it completely. Enough for what? Jayden didn't answer. His father held his gaze, waiting. But when no words came, he nodded slightly, stepping back, letting the silence settle. You want to learn how to fight? He asked after a moment, voice calm, deliberate. Jayden hesitated only a second before nodding. Daniel's lips quirked slightly, something sharp and knowing flashing in his eyes. Then we start tomorrow. Jayden felt his pulse quicken, but this time it wasn't frustration burning in his chest. It was something else, something new, something that tasted like resolve. The days blurred together in a cycle that had long become familiar. Jayden walking the halls of Ridgewood High, blending into the background, avoiding unnecessary conflict, knowing all too well that a wrong move could turn an already uncomfortable existence into something far worse. He had gotten good at maneuvering around the school's unspoken rules, at recognizing the moments where speaking up wasn't worth the fallout, at choosing restraint over resistance, because that's what had always been expected of him. But something had shifted after that last encounter with Tyler. Maybe it was the way Tyler had laughed as he walked away, that smug, entitled expression, as if the outcome had never been in question. Maybe it was the way the students had looked at Jayden afterward, not with pity or sympathy, but with quiet acceptance, as if his humiliation had been inevitable. Or maybe it was the way his father had studied him in the garage that night, the knowing look in his eyes as he spoke of control, of finishing fights rather than starting them. Whatever it was, it lingered. It burned beneath the surface, silent but persistent, fueling every hour he spent in the gym after school, every session where his father pushed him harder, correcting his form, refining his movements, making him faster, stronger. There was no grand speech, no dramatic declaration about revenge, just repetition, discipline, control. Each lesson drilled into him a single truth. Strength wasn't about throwing the first punch. It was about knowing when to strike and making it count. And yet, when the moment finally came, when he found himself standing in the Ridgewood High parking lot, face to face with Tyler and his crew, all of that training, all of that preparation, felt like a distant memory. The sun had barely started its descent when Jayden heard his name called across the lot, a voice laced with mockery and something sharper, anticipation. He had felt it all day, the way Tyler had been watching him in class, the way his presence had loomed heavier than usual. And now, as Jayden turned to see him leaning casually against his car, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the edges of his mouth, he knew exactly what was about to happen. A few students had gathered, lingering near their own cars, some exchanging quiet murmurs, others pretending not to watch. But they were watching. They always watched. Jayden forced himself to stay calm, to keep his expression unreadable as Tyler pushed off his car and took a slow, deliberate step forward, his voice carrying over the quiet hum of conversation. "Heard you've been working out, Jayden," he mused, tilting his head slightly, like he was genuinely curious. "That true?" Jayden didn't respond. Tyler's smirk widened. "Oh, come on. I think it's cute. You really thought lifting a few weights was gonna make a difference?" He stepped closer, closing the distance between them, his voice lowering just slightly. "You don't belong here, and nothing you do is ever gonna change that." Jayden swallowed, forcing himself to stand still, to keep his breathing even. But Tyler could sense hesitation, and hesitation was weakness. The first shove came fast, harder than usual, enough to send Jayden stumbling back a step. The crowd stirred. Jayden steadied himself, inhaling sharply, trying to push back the instinct to react. Tyler's eyes gleamed with amusement, sensing the restraint, the effort, and he wasn't done. Another shove, even harder. This time Jayden's back hit the side of a car. Laughter rippled through the group. Something inside Jayden coiled tight. He could hear his father's voice in his head. "You don't win fights by reacting. You win them by controlling the fight before it begins." But right now, Tyler had control. Jayden wasn't ready, and Tyler knew it. A sharp crack rang out as Tyler's hand slapped Jayden across the face. An open palm hit, meant for humiliation rather than damage, the sound splitting through the air and sending a fresh wave of laughter through the onlookers. Jayden's face burned. His breath stilled in his chest. And just like that, every ounce of training, every second spent preparing for a moment like this, disappeared. Tyler saw it in his eyes. The hesitation, the doubt, the uncertainty that hadn't fully left him yet. And so he struck again. Not with a slap this time, but with a fist. The punch came fast. And this time, Jayden wasn't quick enough to move. It caught him clean across the jaw, sending a jolt of pain through his skull, his vision blurring for a second as he staggered, losing his footing. Before he could recover, Tyler was on him, driving him backward, fists swinging, pushing him down, feeding off the momentum, the laughter, the approval of the crowd. Jayden tried to swing back, but Tyler was stronger, heavier, and before he knew it, his back hit the pavement, the world spinning for a moment before a knee pressed against his chest, pinning him in place. Tyler's breath was uneven, his face flushed with exertion, but his grin never wavered. "You're pathetic," he murmured, just loud enough for Jayden to hear. Jayden tried to shove him off, but Tyler didn't budge. The crowd leaned in, murmuring, waiting, some entertained, others shifting uncomfortably. But no one stepped in. And then, just when Jayden thought it was over, just when he thought Tyler would finally back off, he felt the slow, deliberate weight of spit landing on his cheek. The laughter that followed was deafening. Tyler finally pushed himself up, stepping back, shaking his head in mock disappointment. "Stay down, Jayden," he called over his shoulder as he turned away, his friends falling in beside him, the group dispersing as if nothing had happened. "You always do." Jayden didn't move, not immediately. His cheek stung, his ribs ached, his pride was gone. He could still hear them laughing, still feel the weight of every eye that had watched him fall and done nothing. For a long moment, he simply lay there, staring up at the sky, the world blurred around the edges, his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. Then, slowly, shakily, he pushed himself up. He didn't say anything, didn't look at anyone. He just walked away. And when he finally got home that night, his father took one look at him, at the swollen bruise forming along his jaw, the cut on his lip, the stiffness in his movements, and for the first time, Daniel Carter understood. The air in the Carter household was heavier than usual that night, not with words, but with silence, thick and weighted, settling between father and son like an unspoken understanding neither had dared to acknowledge until now. Jayden sat at the dining table, untouched food in front of him, his movements slow, methodical, as he pushed a fork idly against his plate, his mind distant, replaying every second of that afternoon's humiliation in the parking lot. Every fist, every shove, every piece of laughter that had cut deeper than Tyler's blows ever could. Across from him, Daniel Carter watched. He had noticed the shift in Jayden for weeks, the tension in his shoulders, the way he seemed quieter, more withdrawn. But now, staring at the bruises forming along his jaw, the split in his lower lip, the dullness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, there was no need to ask if something was wrong. He already knew the answer. What he didn't know was why his son had chosen to keep this from him. A long moment passed before Daniel finally spoke, his voice calm but firm, steady in the way a man's voice could only be after spending a lifetime controlling it. "Tell me what's happening at that school." Jayden's grip tightened slightly around his fork, his eyes dropping to his plate. "Nothing," he muttered. Daniel leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, gaze unwavering. "Try again." Jayden exhaled, sharp and frustrated, pushing his plate away as he sat back in his chair. "It doesn't matter." Daniel's brow lifted slightly. "Doesn't matter." His voice didn't rise, but there was something in it now. Something firm, something unyielding. "You come home looking like that and expect me to believe it doesn't matter?" Jayden's jaw clenched, but still, he said nothing. His father studied him for a moment longer before shaking his head, sitting back. "You think I don't know what this is?" He motioned toward him, toward the bruises, the exhaustion, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You think I haven't been where you are?" Jayden's gaze flickered up, just for a second. Daniel let out a breath, slow and deliberate, before leaning forward again, folding his hands together. "You ever hear the story about how I got my first promotion?" Jayden didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. "I was 23, fresh out of Ranger School, just made it into the unit," Daniel continued, his voice steady, the weight of memory settling into his tone. "New guys, we were always tested, pushed around, not in any way that left a mark, but we knew what it was. They wanted to see what we were made of." He let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head slightly. "One guy, Staff Sergeant Haynes, he made it his personal mission to remind me every day that I wasn't one of them yet. Every mistake, he made sure everyone knew about it. Every small victory, he made sure it didn't mean a damn thing." Jayden listened, his expression unreadable, but Daniel could see the way his shoulders had tensed, the way he had leaned in just slightly. "One night," Daniel continued, "we were on a training exercise, high stakes, high pressure. I nailed my role perfectly. Should have been a win. Instead, Haynes made a scene, tore me down in front of the others, called me a liability, a mistake, tried to make me believe it." He paused, then exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "And I almost did, almost let him make me doubt myself, almost accepted that I was the one who needed to back down." Jayden swallowed, but still didn't speak. Daniel's eyes locked onto his son's. "You know what I did?" Jayden hesitated before shaking his head. Daniel's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. Something sharper, something raw. "I put him on the ground." A flicker of something crossed Jayden's face. Not just surprise, but something deeper. Daniel leaned in slightly, his voice lowering. "I waited. I trained harder, pushed myself past every limit I thought I had. And when the time came, when it really mattered, I put him down in front of everyone. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I was angry, but because I had to. Because if I didn't, if I let him take that from me, it would have never stopped." The room was silent. Then, finally, Daniel spoke again. "That's what you have to do." Jayden's throat felt tight. "It's different," he muttered. "You don't get it." Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "I don't?" Jayden hesitated, then let out a bitter chuckle, shaking his head. "You were a soldier, in a unit. You had a mission. I'm just a kid in some school, dealing with an idiot who— You think a bully's any different just because he wears a different uniform? Daniel cut in, voice quiet but firm. You think the rules change just because the battlefield looks different? Jaden didn't have an answer for that. His father leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, his expression hard but not unkind. They're all the same, he continued. Men like Haynes, men like Tyler. They push because they want to see you fall. And when you don't, when you take it and never push back, it tells them they can keep going. Jaden stared at him. His father's expression didn't change. That's why I'm going to train you, Daniel said simply. And I mean really train you. No more hitting a bag to work out your frustration. No more just throwing punches in the garage. You are going to learn how to fight, how to win. You're going to learn what it means to take power back. Jaden felt his heart hammering against his ribs, but he kept his voice steady. And what happens when I do? Daniel met his eyes, his voice absolute. Then you finish it. The words settled between them, final, undeniable. Jaden inhaled slowly, something shifting inside him, something that felt like certainty, like the last piece falling into place. He nodded once. His father nodded back. And just like that, the training truly began. The mornings started earlier now. The nights stretched longer. The weight on Jaden's shoulders, once just the burden of silence and humiliation, had shifted into something tangible, something that burned in his muscles, settled in his bones, pushed him forward when exhaustion clawed at him. His father was relentless. There were no shortcuts, no easy lessons, only discipline, only sweat, only pain. The first morning of training, Jaden had expected to step into the garage, throw a few punches at the bag, maybe some drills. But that wasn't how Daniel Carter trained soldiers, and it wasn't how he was going to train his son. Instead, his father had pointed to the door. Run, he had said. Arms crossed, his face unreadable. Jaden had frowned. How far? Daniel's answer had been simple. Until I say, stop. And so, he had run. At first, it had been easy. His legs carried him effortlessly, his breath came steady. But as the minutes stretched into miles, as the cold morning air clawed at his lungs, as his body started screaming for him to slow down, he had begun to understand. This wasn't about speed. It wasn't about endurance. It was about breaking the part of him that wanted to quit before it even began. He had pushed until his legs trembled, until his throat was raw with gasped breaths. And when he had finally stopped, when he had turned back expecting to see his father waiting with approval, Daniel had just stared at him, eyes sharp, unreadable. You done? Jaden had wiped sweat from his brow, his breathing uneven. Then, gritting his teeth, he had shaken his head. Daniel had nodded. Good. Keep going. And that had been the first day. The same pattern continued the next morning, and the one after that. Each day began the same way, running before the sun had fully risen, pushing his body past what it thought was possible, learning that exhaustion wasn't an excuse, but a state of mind that could be ignored, controlled, defeated. After the runs came the drills. His father didn't waste time on complicated movements, never let him indulge in flashy combinations meant to impress. Every strike had a purpose. Every movement had a reason. Speed doesn't mean a damn thing if your footing is wrong, Daniel had told him, voice even, watching like a predator watching its cub learn to hunt. You don't need 10 punches. You need one that counts. Jaden had listened. He had learned. And then, after hours of relentless practice, came the sparring. The first time they stepped onto the mat in the garage, Jaden had expected to feel some level of control, some small sense of preparedness after everything he had learned. But the first hit came faster than he expected, a sharp jab to the ribs before he had even fully settled into his stance. He had stumbled, gasping, instinctively raising his hands to block, but his father was already moving. A strike to the side, another to the gut. Not enough to injure, not enough to cause real damage, but enough to drive home a single, Undeniable truth. He wasn't ready. "You think this is about anger?" Daniel had asked, stepping back, watching as Jaden struggled to catch his breath. "You think this is about standing there and throwing wild punches?" Jaden had wiped blood from his lip, breathing hard. Daniel had shaken his head. "This is about control. It's about knowing exactly when to hit and making sure it's the last one you need." He had gestured for Jaden to get up, his voice steady, unrelenting. Again, and so, every day, they had gone again. Jaden got faster. Jaden got stronger. But more than anything, Jaden learned. The punches that had once sent him staggering now barely knocked him off balance. His father still hit hard, still tested him. But Jaden's body moved differently now, instinctively, precisely, like he wasn't just reacting, but predicting. One evening, as they squared off again, something changed. Jaden had ducked at the right moment, pivoted on instinct, and landed a sharp, clean strike to his father's ribs before he could counter. Daniel had taken a step back, nodding slightly, rubbing his side where the hit had landed. For the first time, his father grinned. "Now you're thinking," he had said, the closest thing to praise he had ever given. Jaden had smirked, rolling his shoulders, for the first time actually feeling ready. But outside of that garage, outside of the sweat and the training and the bruises, Ridgewood High hadn't changed. If anything, the bullying had only grown worse. Tyler wasn't an idiot. He could sense something was different. Maybe it was the way Jaden didn't flinch anymore when he approached, the way he held his ground instead of backing away, the way the usual insults and shoves didn't land the way they used to. Tyler wasn't used to not getting a reaction, and it infuriated him. So he escalated. Jaden's locker was trashed twice. His books were knocked from his hands more times than he could count. One day in the cafeteria, Tyler had grabbed his tray right out of his hands, smirking as he dumped the food onto the floor. "Pick it up, boy," he had sneered, voice dripping with mockery. Jaden had just stared at him. His hands had clenched at his sides. His pulse had hammered. Every fiber of his being had screamed for him to react. But he didn't, not yet, because he was waiting for the right moment, waiting for the moment his father had told him about, waiting for the moment where there would be no teachers, no crowd of friends backing Tyler up, no distractions, waiting for the moment where he could finish it. And that moment was coming. For weeks, he had felt it building, a quiet, simmering tension, a storm forming at the edges of every school day, waiting for the right moment to break. He had seen it in the way Tyler had watched him, the way his usual taunts had become sharper, the way the frustration had begun bleeding through the cracks in his cocky smirk every time Jaden refused to give him the reaction he wanted. Tyler wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to seeing someone he had knocked down get back up without fear in their eyes. And so, Jaden had waited. He had endured the shoves, the insults, the humiliation that Tyler had thrown at him in a desperate attempt to force him back into place. He had ignored the voices in the cafeteria, the laughter in the hallways, the food knocked from his hands, because he wasn't just looking for payback. He wasn't looking for revenge in a crowded hallway or in front of an audience of whispering students. He was looking for the moment when Tyler would be alone. And when that moment finally arrived, Jaden didn't hesitate. The school parking lot was nearly empty when Jaden stepped outside that afternoon, the late-day sun casting long shadows across the pavement, the last few students filtering into their cars, lost in their own conversations, their own worlds. He had been expecting it today, had felt it the second he had locked eyes with Tyler in class, had seen it in the way the other boy had looked at him, like something had already been decided. And now, as he turned the corner behind the school, he wasn't surprised to see Tyler already there, leaning against the back wall near the maintenance shed, arms crossed, waiting, no crowd, no backup, just him for the first time. Jaden didn't slow, didn't stop, didn't change his pace as he approached, his heart steady, his body already ready. Tyler pushed off the wall, that familiar smirk curling at the edges of his mouth. But there was something underneath it now. Something different. "Been waiting for you, Jaden," he said, voice casual. Too casual. Jaden stopped a few feet away, meeting his gaze, saying nothing. Tyler tilted his head slightly, studying him. "You've been acting different lately." His voice was still light, but there was a sharpness in it now, something colder. "Walking around like you don't know your place anymore. Like you've forgotten who I am." Jaden exhaled slowly. "I know exactly who you are." Tyler's smirk widened. "Yeah?" He took a step forward. "Then you should know what happens next." Jaden did know. He had always known. And this time, he was ready. Tyler moved first. It was fast, faster than Jaden had expected, but not faster than he could react. The punch came wide, telegraphed, the same mistake he had made during their first fight in the parking lot. Jaden didn't move back. He didn't flinch. He stepped into it. His left hand snapped up, deflecting the punch mid-air, redirecting the momentum. Tyler barely had time to register the shift before Jaden countered. A sharp strike to the ribs, fast, controlled, precise. Tyler staggered back, breath hitching, shock flashing across his face. Jaden didn't wait. He advanced. A quick step forward, a controlled combination, a jab, a hook, a strike that clipped Tyler's jaw just enough to send him stumbling. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't wild. It was measured, calculated. Tyler regained his footing, his expression twisting with fury. "You think—" He barely got the words out before he lunged again, his movements sloppier now, his anger bleeding into his form. Jaden didn't fall for it. He sidestepped, let Tyler's own momentum work against him. His footwork was solid now, his stance unshakable, his body moving on instinct. Tyler swung again, desperate now, but Jaden was already inside his space, already seeing the opening before it happened. And this time, he didn't hold back. A final strike, clean, direct, undeniable, connected with Tyler's gut, knocking the air from his lungs. His knees buckled, and before he could regain control, Jaden was on him, driving him backward, forcing him off balance, pinning him against the brick wall. The fight was over. Tyler knew it. Jaden could see it in his eyes. The sudden realization that the balance had shifted, that he wasn't the one in control anymore. For years, Tyler had tormented him, beaten him, humiliated him, had built his own image off the idea that Jaden would never fight back, that he would always stay down, that he would always be someone to laugh at, to push around. Not anymore. Jaden leaned in slightly, his voice calm, steady, final. "You're done." Tyler swallowed hard, but said nothing. Jaden held his gaze for a long moment, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of it settle. Then, finally, he stepped back. Tyler stayed against the wall for a second longer, breathing hard, eyes darting away. And then, without another word, he turned and ran away. Jaden watched him go, heart still steady, breath still even. He could feel the ache in his knuckles, the bruises already forming along his ribs, but none of it mattered, because this time, he hadn't lost. This time, Tyler had been the one to walk away. The walk home felt different. The world wasn't any quieter, wasn't any brighter, and yet, something had shifted. The weight that had sat in Jaden's chest for so long, pressing against his ribs, making every breath feel heavy, was gone. Not just lifted, gone. He could still feel the ache in his knuckles, the dull sting in his ribs where Tyler had landed a hit before everything had turned against him, but none of it mattered, because for the first time, he had won. Not just a fight, not just some scrap behind the school. He had won himself back. Tyler wasn't untouchable anymore. He wasn't the force he had spent years convincing everyone he was. He had swung. He had fought, and he had lost. That changed everything. The thought carried him all the way to his doorstep, the familiar scent of home drifting into his lungs the second he stepped inside, the hum of the television in the background, the faint clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Everything felt the same, But Jaden knew he wasn't walking into this house the same way he had yesterday. His father was in the living room, his usual place on the couch, a bottle of water in one hand, remote in the other, flipping through the channels without much interest. He didn't look up immediately, didn't ask anything the second Jaden walked through the door. But Jaden knew he had already seen. It was in the slight shift of his shoulders, the way his grip on the remote paused just for a second, before he finally turned his head, eyes locking onto his son. And just like that, Daniel Carter knew. He set the remote down, exhaling through his nose. "You did it." Jaden let out a breath, nodding slowly. "I did it." For a second, neither of them said anything. Then, just like that, Daniel laughed. A sharp, genuine sound that barely ever made its way past his lips. A sound Jaden had heard so rarely, it almost startled him. But there it was. Pride. Real. Unfiltered pride. His father pushed himself up from the couch, stepping forward, pressing a firm hand against Jaden's shoulder, giving it a shake. "Damn right you did." Jaden hadn't realized how much he had needed to hear that. The tension that had still been lingering in his chest. The last traces of doubt, of wondering if this victory had truly meant something, all of it disappeared under the weight of those words, under the solid grip of his father's hand, the silent acknowledgement that everything he had gone through, everything he had endured, had led to this moment. For the first time, he wasn't just Daniel Carter's son. He was a fighter in his own right. Daniel gave his shoulder one last shake before stepping back, exhaling, "Tell me everything." And so, Jaden did. Every detail, every moment, the way Tyler had looked at him before the fight, the way his fists had finally moved without hesitation, without fear, the way Tyler had backed down, had walked away, knowing he had lost. Every second of it mattered, because every second of it had been a moment where Jaden had taken something back. Daniel listened, arms crossed, nodding occasionally, his expression unreadable, though Jaden could still see the small traces of pride behind his eyes. But when Jaden finally finished, when he let out a breath, waiting for his father's reaction, Daniel's expression shifted. The pride didn't disappear, but something else settled in its place. A different kind of knowing, a different kind of lesson. "You're feeling good right now," Daniel said finally, stepping back, moving toward the kitchen where a half-full glass of water sat on the counter. He grabbed it, taking a sip before looking back at Jaden. "And you should. You earned it." Jaden nodded, but his father wasn't done. "But understand something," Daniel continued, setting the glass down. "That fight, it doesn't end just because you won." His eyes darkened slightly, voice dipping into something lower, something more serious. "You put him in his place, but people like him. They don't forget that, and they don't take losing lightly." Jaden felt something cold slip down his spine. He hadn't thought about that. Not yet. Tyler's pride isn't gone. It's just bruised, Daniel said, watching his son closely. "And the worst thing you can do right now is let your guard down." Jaden inhaled slowly. His father wasn't wrong. He had seen it in Tyler's eyes before he walked away. That burning, that silent rage that came with knowing your entire world had just shifted against you. Tyler had lost today, but that didn't mean he was done. Daniel must have seen the realization settle in because he finally exhaled, stepping forward, placing both hands on Jaden's shoulders. "This is where discipline matters," he said, voice steady. "You fought for your respect. You fought for your place. Now, you protect it." Jaden swallowed, nodding slowly. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something bigger. His father squeezed his shoulders one last time before letting go, stepping back. "Now," Daniel said, smirking slightly, the weight of the conversation lifting just enough for the moment to breathe again. "I think this calls for a celebration." Jaden raised a brow. "Celebration?" Daniel motioned toward the kitchen, already moving toward the cabinets. "You think I'd let my son go through all that training just to come home and eat whatever we got in the fridge? Hell no! I'm making steaks." Jaden blinked. "Wait, you actually cook?" Daniel shot him a look. "I can make a damn steak, Jaden. Don't insult me." Jaden smirked, shaking his head. the weight in his chest finally settling into something lighter. Victory tasted good. But just as he was about to help set up, just as the moment had begun to truly feel like something worth holding on to, there was a sharp, heavy pounding at the front door. The entire atmosphere shifted. Daniel stilled. Jaden turned toward the entrance, the sound echoing through the house, shaking the walls. The kind of knock that wasn't a request, but a demand. His father exhaled slowly, cracking his neck, rolling his shoulders back like a man who already knew exactly what was waiting for him on the other side. And just like that, Jaden knew too. Tyler hadn't forgotten. Daniel walked toward the door, steps calm, controlled, deliberate. Jaden felt his pulse pick up, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something else, something sharper, something that whispered, this fight wasn't over, not yet. The pounding at the door came again, harder this time, each impact rattling the frame, sending a deep, vibrating pulse through the quiet of the house. Jaden stood frozen for a brief moment, the weight of everything settling in all at once. The fight, the victory, the warning his father had just given him. This wasn't over. Daniel Carter exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders back, straightening his stance, preparing. There was no hesitation in his steps as he moved toward the door, no uncertainty in the way his hand gripped the knob, no moment of pause before he yanked it open, revealing exactly what he had been expecting. Richard Reynolds. The man stood on the doorstep, broad and imposing, his features contorted with something between anger and barely controlled rage. His light blue button-up was wrinkled, the sleeves pushed to his elbows, as if he had stormed out of his house in a hurry, fists clenching and unclenching at his sides, his eyes, cold, sharp, filled with the same condescension and entitlement his son carried, locked onto Daniel's the second the door swung open. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence where the air itself thickened between them, both men sizing the other up in an instant. Then Richard let out a sharp breath, shaking his head slightly, his lips curling in a sneer. "You've got some nerve." Daniel didn't move, didn't blink. "You're standing on my doorstep, pounding on my door like you're about to issue a warrant. So how about you just say what you came here to say and get to the point?" Richard's expression darkened. "You know exactly why I'm here." Daniel lifted a brow, arms crossing over his chest. "No, but I have a feeling you're about to tell me." Richard took a step forward, invasive, posturing, puffing up his chest like the sheer weight of his presence was supposed to do something. "Your son put his hands on my boy today. Left him bleeding, bruised. My kid walks through this town with my name, and now people are whispering like he's some kind of—" His voice cut off for a moment, his jaw clenching. "You think I'm gonna let that slide?" Daniel didn't flinch. He had seen this kind of man 1,000 times before, the kind who mistook privilege for power, the kind who believed respect was something they were owed instead of something they had to earn, the kind who had never had to answer for their actions, who had never once been held accountable because the world had always let them believe they were untouchable. And he could see, clear as day, that Richard's anger had nothing to do with his son being hurt. It had to do with the fact that his son had lost. Daniel exhaled, slow and measured, shaking his head slightly. "Let me guess," he said, voice calm, unreadable. "Tyler told you he was minding his own business, that Jaden just came out of nowhere and attacked him, and you believed it. That about right?" Richard scoffed. "You calling my kid a liar?" Daniel's lips twitched, something cold passing through his eyes. "I'm calling him your kid." Richard's hands clenched at his sides. "Say that again?" Daniel took a step forward now, closing the distance between them, his expression unwavering. "I said, your son is a liar. He has been since the day he learned he could get away with it." Richard's face twisted. But before he could speak, before he could launch into whatever self-righteous tirade he had been rehearsing on the drive over, Daniel kept going. "My son's been coming home with bruises for months, and I let it go. I let it go because I wanted him to learn how to pick his battles, wanted him to understand that some things aren't worth the fight. But Tyler didn't stop, because kids like him never stop, not until they realize they aren't the biggest dog in the yard. So he pushed, and he pushed, and then today, he got what was coming to him. Daniel's voice never wavered, never rose, but there was something lethal buried beneath every word. And now you're standing here at my door, trying to turn this into something it isn't, trying to pretend like your son is the victim. Richard let out a bitter, humorless laugh, shaking his head. You people are unbelievable. And there it was. Jaden felt his stomach tighten, felt his fists clench at his sides, but his father didn't react, didn't even blink, as if he had already been expecting it. You act like you're better than us, Richard continued, voice laced with venom now, his posture shifting as his anger took on a new edge. Like you don't know your place, like you're not standing in a house you shouldn't even own, in a neighborhood you don't belong in, raising a son who... Daniel moved. It was fast. So fast that for a split second, Richard actually flinched, his body stiffening as if preparing for something physical. But Daniel didn't lay a hand on him, didn't raise his fists, didn't react with anything but cold, unshakable restraint. Instead, he simply stepped forward, just enough that Richard had no choice but to take a step back, just enough that the shift in power was immediate, undeniable. You want to talk about places? Daniel's voice was low now, deadly quiet. Then listen real close, because I want to make sure you hear me, Reynolds. My son is not beneath yours. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. And the only reason I'm still standing here having this conversation, instead of handling this the way men like you actually deserve, is because I want to make sure you understand something real clear. The next time your son tries this, the next time he lays a hand on my kid, I won't be the one holding him back. Richard's face twisted into something unreadable. For the first time,